super excited to be kicking off our fall season of Object workshops with Sarah Friar, the CEO of Nextdoor and a board member at Walmart and Slack. If this were an in-person event, we would have an activity, and because I love to eat, some food, but COVID, so Zoom is the next best thing. I will spend 30 minutes interviewing Ms. Friar, and then I will open it up to you so that you can ask her some questions as well. So throughout the session, please type any questions that you have into the Q&A. And when it's your turn to ask a question, I will ask you to turn on your camera and you can ask her directly. So with that, let's get started. Ms. Friar, once again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Manat. And please call me Sarah. Friar kind of freaks me out. So I'm not even sure who that is.
Well, Sarah, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Where did you grow up?
Sure. So hello, everyone. I'm so impressed you guys do this on a Saturday morning. I wish I'd had this when I was growing up, just to meet other phenomenal women and girls who clearly are really out to change the status quo. So thank you. I grew up in Northern Ireland, not Ireland, not the UK, but Northern Ireland. I grew up at a pretty difficult time. So Northern Ireland was effectively at war. We called it the Troubles. If you think about it, we had an issue of Catholics and Protestants across the divide fighting over this really small piece of land. And that meant that there was a lot of bombing going on, a lot of shootings. It was, could be pretty darn unpleasant at times. And I saw a lot of that as a kid. That said, I also grew up in a tiny little village called Sion Mills. Population today, I think, is about 1,500 people. And the village was founded around a mill, hence the name Sion Mills. Sion meant Hill of the Fairies in Irish, and mill was for the mill. And the mill was created by the Quakers in, I think, around 1850. And the Quakers had this really interesting approach, like far ahead of their time, what today we would call stakeholder value, because not only did they want to create the mill where people would work, but they also believed that you should create the environment. So they built the schools, they built the churches, one for every religion. They built the local shop, it was called the Mill Shop. They built the local working men's club. I'm like, where the hell was the working women's club? But they had the working men's club. And in and around the mill, they had sports facilities like tennis courts and bowling and cricket and football, soccer. So they had this concept. And because of that, our village was this little oasis in the middle of Northern Ireland where Catholics and Protestants lived side by side. And I tell you all this because we're going to talk about Nextdoor and community. And to me, my kind of grounding in community was formed in that little village. My mom was the local nurse. She was actually a midwife. She delivered a huge portion of the village because there was no hospital to go to. They mostly delivered at home in kind of rural communities. My dad was the personnel manager, the HR person for the mill. And so one of my strongest memories of growing up was at around 6 p.m. every night, we'd sit down to what we called tea, which was dinner. And there'd always be a knock at our back door and someone would be there and they would need everything from maybe they had a medical problem. So my mom would kick into action. They might need a job. So my dad would sit down and talk them through. They might be having all sorts of awful issues like domestic violence. Like we would see women come through where their husband didn't have a job. He was getting drunk every night. He was beating her up. And my mom and dad would figure out how to solve the problem. And that feeling of community and how everyone has a role to play, right? A very we society, not an I society, was a huge part of how I grew up and why the things I work on today around community really matter to me. And that's why I wanted to do this call, because you all are building a community. And I think it's incredibly important.
That's an incredible story. And that village sounds like something I've only seen in movies.
Well, it wasn't all like sunshine and rainbows either. There was a lot of poverty, but it was really special that there was that ability to build community across the divide.
Absolutely. So then what was your career journey like and how did you get into business?
So I was not your where I grew up was not a place where typically you would head into business. I was good in school. I'm sure everyone on this call is good in school. I was the A student. I loved sciences. Actually really grateful that I don't feel there was this sense of like girls couldn't do science. In fact, my girlfriends to this day are like my best friends. We were the rock stars in like math and physics. We got all the best grades. I don't know where the boys were. So that wasn't really a holdback. But when you did get good grades, you pretty much were expected to become a doctor, maybe an accountant, or to work on the farm. Like those were your three jobs. My brother's a doctor. I'm the failure case. But actually, I was just talking to Manat. I took a year out, actually worked for an accounting firm because that was the stream that I was expected to go into. But I had this amazing moment where I was thinking about becoming a doctor. I'd actually done a summer working at the local hospital. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. And I was sitting in our career room at school, which was like a cupboard effectively. And I picked up a magazine and there was an ad in the magazine. Back in the day, there was no internet, so it was hard copy. And there was an ad for this company called Arthur Andersen. And they were offering a 1-year gap year. And I actually wasn't super interested in the accounting part. I was like, I have no idea what that is. Looks like they'd pay me, so that would be good, because I had this problem I was trying to solve. I'd gotten into Oxford. It was super atypical. My parents didn't go to college. They didn't really necessarily think I needed to go to college, and they couldn't really afford to send me. In the UK, education was free. So the good news, it wasn't about paying for the school, but they couldn't afford to pay for my accommodation and food and flights to get there, or boat, or whatever I was going to get into mainland England. So Arthur Andersen popped up and they were going to pay me. And then they were going to offer me a travel grant. And I just had itchy feet. Like Irish people always talk about this wanderlust, which I firmly believe in. I am a wanderlust person. I'm always curious about wanting to go see other places. And so I applied, and that really changed my life because number one, it allowed me to go to university. And I can't imagine if I'd not gone to university. Number two, it opened my eyes to business. And I really fell in love with business that whole period of time, not accounting, but just businesses. And number three, it allowed me to go travel. And I traveled all around Asia at 18, 19. I was probably turning 19 at a time when there was no, there was no mobile phones. You weren't texting and telling your parents you were alive. I had to call home every Sunday, or every other Sunday. So every 2 weeks, I had a call to my parents. Had to be short because it's really expensive, but effectively went like, I'm still alive. How's it going? It's awesome. I just saw, insert some crazy thing I just saw. And then pretty much I'd hang up until when I was in Australia, I got my wallet stolen. And then the call was like, Mom, I have no money, help. And my mom and dad had to wire me, I think it was £100 to kind of keep me alive till I could find a job in Australia, where I kind of finished out my last probably almost 6 weeks of backpacking, working on a dive boat.
That's crazy. If I don't call my parents like every night, they just automatically assume I'm dead. So
I know, and I have a 16-year-old daughter, just like all of you. So yes, I would assume she was dead too. She'd call me every single day.
And what lessons did you learn on this gap year traveling by yourself, and how did it shape your outlook?
Yeah, so number one, I think you learn very fast how to read situations and read people. And the thing I've I feel like your gut is this powerful thing, like whatever term you use for it, your intuition, your gut, your spidey sense, you really learn fast not to wait around. Like if it just doesn't feel right, don't do it. Because, I kind of would meet people along the way, and some people I'd choose to backpack alongside with, and some people you just kind of knew you didn't want to be there. You would arrive into a city, maybe at night on a train or on a bus, however you were traveling. And there would be lots of people at that place who'd be like, come with me, I have a room. And you really quickly had to say, am I actually going to trust this person? Like everyone traveled at the time with the Lonely Planet guides. We would get out our Lonely Planet and show up. But it taught us a lot about, I think, gut and intuition. That's number one. Number two, it taught me to stay curious. Like you're going to probably ask me at the end advice, stay curious. Oh my gosh, it is such a beautiful thing in life to feel like there's always more learning out there. Just seeing other cultures in action, taking the time to stop and speak to normal people, I think is just a beautiful gift in life. And I think it also taught me about taking risks. Like the most amazing things have happened to me in my life when I've done something that in Irish would say, scares the bejesus out of you. That has always been a moment when my life has accelerated to kind of a next level.
Wow, that's really cool. I mean, I'm taking a gap year too this year, and I've learned just so much of the same things in 2 months. So I definitely feel you on all of those points.
Yep.
I've also learned how to just be by myself and like ask for a table for one at a restaurant, which I think is the most depressing thing anyone could do.
It is. And like, as someone who travels a lot with work, I often find myself in those moments. I actually like that solitariness. Like, I always feel like don't be embarrassed by it. I love to read, so I always have a book with me. But it's kind of nice sometimes just to have quiet time. Like, as you get older, there's a period you go through with your kids. My kids are kind of coming out the other side, but it always felt like, I almost physically felt like I'd come home from work and these little people would just like glom onto me. Like, sometimes I'd literally feel like I was peeling my son off me, which is so ironic because today I give anything for a hug from that 14-year-old boy. But like, he would like be physically attached to me as I moved around the house. And so learning to love some of that solitariness, it's like a beautiful moment for your brain. It is hard, and people always ask, like, is anyone else coming? You're like, no, it's just me. And you see other people looking at you, but like, I think this is the other thing you learn as you grow older, that actually they're not looking at you. Like, people have no time to care what you are doing. Like, you are the main character in your story. And so they're not looking at you coming up with some other story. They're wondering, whether to order the chicken or the fish. So like, just, going back into your own head and enjoy the moment.
Absolutely. And you touched on earlier this importance of community in your life. So can you tell me more about Nextdoor and why the work that you do is important?
Yeah. So Nextdoor, I feel, is a glorious arc in my career. I feel so blessed that it came along. I really subscribe to a framework called Ikigai. Big reader, so go check out Ikigai. It's Ikigai. It's a Japanese construct, and it's like a 4-circle Venn diagram. And it's about finding in your life the thing you're good at, the thing you're passionate about, the thing the world needs, and then finally the thing you can get paid for. Without that last circle, it's a hobby. And when you are in the middle, like, if you think about, like, if you're doing what you're good at or what you love, that's where you often find passion, but it might not be quite what the world needs. If you think about what the world needs and what you get paid for, that's often a vocation, like a doctor, but again, it might not be where your passion lies. When you can get in the center of that circle, you're in what's called flow. And at that moment, I think the positive of that moment is you have so much energy, right? Work doesn't feel like work. Work just feels like flow. Like, you have ideas, you're creative, you're innovative, you feel like you're having massive impact. You need to be careful, because I think in excess, it leads to being a workaholic, and I definitely can veer into that zone too. The reason researchers came up with this concept of Ikigai was doing a lot of interviewing in blue zones, places where people live, long lives. And it's really because you're not in stress. So your body's not creating things like cortisol and inflammation, which we know have long-term bad impacts on your overall health. But back to Nextdoor. So when Nextdoor came along, I was super happy. I was the CFO of Square. We were doing great things. We had taken the company public. I literally would say all the time, I have the best job in the world. And then Nextdoor showed up, and I kind of said, I feel like this is a moment when, number one, all of this talk I have all the time about community, it may be a moment where, whatever being you believe in, the universe, God, whatever it is kind of saying, okay, lady, put your money where your mouth is. Like, go actually do this community thing that you talk about all the time, do it at scale. I think the second thing was actually wanting to be a role model, like showing that women can be CEOs. So, I love talking to all of you. As I said, I have a 16-year-old daughter, a 14-year-old son. I think it's really important for them to see, frankly, that women can be CEOs. It's important out there in the world. And I had stood in front of enough women. I have a nonprofit called Ladies Who Launch. And I'm always telling these women, take risks, go do it. And so again, it was a moment of like, put up or shut up. And so that brought me to Nextdoor. Our impact, so our purpose is to cultivate a kinder world where everyone has a neighborhood to rely on. And the thing that I've found in working at Nextdoor is just that importance of proximity. Like, there's so much power in proximity, right? In extreme situations, like in disasters, it's not your friends or your family who save you, frankly. It's literally the people who are there in the moment, right? In a flood, I always say, like, if you're standing and there's like a raging torrent, and someone's going down that torrent, you stick out your hand and you grab them, and you don't have a conversation about like, excuse me, which way do you vote? Or like, do you believe in same-sex marriage? Because I do, and maybe you don't. Like, you don't care about any of that. You are human to human, you pull that person out. And that's what I love about community at its finest, is people don't think about their differences, right? That little village in Sime Mills, we didn't, like the first time our house got kind of decimated by a bomb at the local police barracks and all of our windows had been shattered and we just needed to board up everything to get to sleep. It was our next door neighbors, the McGuigans, who were Catholic and we were Protestant, who showed up with plywood and literally nailed that into all the windows so we could go sleep that night. And they brought us hot food the next day. Wow. They still live next door to my mom and dad. They still show up when we need them. And I really think that power of local is something we've lost as a society. And I think we have to bring that power back. Otherwise, we can't start attacking macro issues like climate change, racism, like all the things that are going wrong in our world, if we don't start trying to find some commonality at a local level.
Absolutely. I actually really like that sort of grassroots approach to building community just with the people around you, because so often we talk about tackling those big issues like gun control or gay marriage, but it just starts with those small acts of kindness.
Right. Yeah. You got to fill the book. There's tons of amazing research. There's a super academic book by Robert Putnam called Bowling Alone, but he really talks about this breakdown in society that started in kind of the 50s, 60s. The US used to be this incredible nation of joiners. People belonged to like all sorts of clubs and they found ways to get together locally. And then actually they kind of trace it back to the advent of TV. So people stopped sitting on their front stoop. They stopped knowing everyone in their village or their town. They moved inside their living room. And then they started to partake in entertainment that even though it was done maybe with a family, it was actually somewhat solitary. And then of course the internet has accelerated that. And so I do think that we are now reaping the fruits of that, where people are much more individualistic. It's much more of an I society. And so, people throw up their arms all the time about like, what can we do? We're so much more polarized. I agree with all of that, but we can admire the problem, or we can just think about how do we start solving the problem.
Definitely. For the girls, just a reminder that please type any questions that you have in the Q&A and then you can ask at the end. But back to you, Ms. Friar, obviously, or Sarah, obviously during COVID, Nextdoor had a lot of growth. So how did you handle that?
Yeah, so it was a kind of a crazy time, like going from February into March of last year, literally our DAO, our daily active users, doubled like almost week over week. Oh, and so when you're building tech companies, you always talk about, building for 10x and, can we flex up? But then when you're tested, you're like, oh, okay, the platform did stay up. I think from a technology standpoint, we had done some good things, like we built on Amazon Web Services on AWS. That actually allowed for a lot of flex. So we weren't building a kind of a fragile monolithic infrastructure. We were in this very scalable architecture. That's just boring tech talk, but that was one thing that was important. Number two, we're a very purpose-driven company. So I already said our purpose. And I feel like when I joined Nextdoor, what I love about purpose-driven companies, and I definitely saw this at Square too, and even somewhat Salesforce, is that the people who join them, they're not just amazing A+ individuals, but they have something extra because they're drawn to a company because of something bigger than them, like because they want to impact and change the world. And so in the moment, they meet the moment. So I remember having this amazing experience where very quickly we knew we needed to have a way for people to give and get help. And so we wanted to create something called Help Map. And I had an engineer building it. And I remember doing a call with him. And at the end of the call, I was like, Kevin, you look like shit. Sorry, I shouldn't swear, but it's not really swearing. It's like the S word. You look like shit. And he's like, yeah, I haven't slept in 72 hours, but we have to get this map up. And he's like, the minute we hit go, I'm going to go to bed. So like someone else is going to take over and triage. But just the fact that he was willing to do that. And this is a man who had a really young baby at the time too. So in a world where we were all anxious, about the like, am I going to get coronavirus? Is my family going to get coronavirus? My extended family? Here was someone just giving so freely of themselves. So that was also a moment. I think for us, we didn't have time to think a lot about the company. Like a lot of CEOs I talked to wanted to talk about things like, how are you dealing with your employees and so on. I was like, yeah, my employees are going to take care of themselves. We're a transparent, purpose-driven company because we need to take care of the 63 million neighbors who need us right now. And it was a beautiful time. Like Nextdoor really met the moment. And then as the year went on, frankly, there were other stresses when we moved into that zone in the summer after the George Floyd murder, and racism was really suddenly a massive topic, frankly, as it should always have been. But now finally there was a spotlight on it. That was actually a much tougher period of time because suddenly you were meeting the moment, but not always the way you wanted to be seen. And as a leader, that's actually harder because you're looking in the mirror and it's not a pretty picture coming back at you, right? When there's racism in the world and you deal with neighborhoods, it's going to show up in neighborhoods. And so we really had to say, okay, we can do better here. We are actually going to dig in and really think about how do we be a welcoming platform for everyone. So for everyone of any color, race, gender, sexual orientation, you name whatever diversity cut you're taking. And so we've spent a lot of time in the last year really going deep there. And it can't just be talk. It has to be in the product itself. And actually, I'm really proud of the fact I was just in DC this week. And I sat on stage with this amazing activist, Jateka 80. She runs a company called Full Circle Strategies. And we talked about some of these things we've done. Like we banned the term all white lives matter. We did a lot of work around all lives matter and blue lives matter to educate neighbors on why, in retort to Black Lives Matter, those can be incredibly hurtful responses, but often it's from a place of ignorance. We've done a lot of work around things like racial profiling posts to make sure we slow people down. We work a lot with Dr. Jennifer Eberhard out of Stanford, for example. So tons we can keep doing, and we're never going to get it right, but we're going to keep showing we're doing the work.
Right. I feel like that puts Nextdoor in a really interesting position. Then you have like this big potential to make an impact with how people see each other and how people see society. But with that obviously comes a big burden as well.
Totally. Yes. Yeah. And I mean, that is leadership 101. If you're working on the hard problems, it's going to be stressful and you're going to get things wrong. And that's true even as individuals. Like, when I ski with my kids, I always say, if we're not falling down, we're not trying hard enough. And so I actively try to help my company look for ways to make mistakes, right? We have a core value called experiment and learn quickly, but we also have a core value called think big, because we don't want people to either be too afraid to try, but the other thing they can do is they start to iterate in small ways. My husband has this phrase all the time he uses, it's called, you can't increment your way to greatness. And I love that because he's totally right? Incrementalism will never have you do the really big thing that impacts the world.
Absolutely. So with that perspective in mind, then using Nextdoor as this power tool to then help benefit society and communities, what's your thoughts on the recent debate that we've seen around social networks not being as productive and healthy for individuals and for communities?
Yeah, I mean, there's actually a Fortune article that just got written by where I'm quoted as saying, I think this kind of growth at any cost mentality is incredibly negative for society. And I think all of us as leaders, particularly in and around areas like social media, right? We often try not to be called social media at Nextdoor, a more community platform, but we do get pulled into that grouping. I think we have real responsibility. So as an example, we do make trade-offs all the time about engagement and growth. So I'll give you an example, starting from just step one. If for all of you, please join Nextdoor. And if you do, what you'll see is that you have to verify that you're a real person at a real address. And of course, in Silicon Valley, you're always taught, oh my God, don't put any friction in the sign-up flow, like make it as easy as possible. And we put massive friction in the sign-up flow, all the way sometimes to if we can't verify you from an electronic, like a database perspective in the back end, we send you a postcard in the mail, which like seems so old school, but it's kind of the most graceful way we can degrade to still verify you live there. Cause like, unless you're stealing someone's mail, which is like, why would you do that just to get on a platform like Nextdoor? But that's a very friction-full experience. If you think about other platforms like, say, Twitter or Instagram, right, they're actively telling you that you don't have to use a real name, right? They have a whole concept of a handle, right? On Twitter, I'm at the Friar, partially because like when I joined, I was like, this Twitter thing is never going to be real, and I don't really want to use my real name. So I did not get that right. Don't tell Jack I said that, since we're good friends. But they're actively sending you a signal that an avatar is fine, is totally appropriate here. So number one, we put friction in the onboarding. We put friction as people are talking. So when we see conversations heat up, and there's lots of technology we can use to see that, right? It doesn't have to just be profanity. We can see things like speed of replies. When people are angry, they actually reply faster. They often use block capitals. They often forget about all punctuation. We're doing a lot of work back with that group at Stanford called Spark on NLP, so natural language processing, to look into when do we know that conversations are contentious. And so in that moment, we've created an infrastructural element. It began with something called kindness reminder. So as we see that happening, right before you're about to post, we pop up a little interstitial in the app, and we're doing two things with it. Number one, when you have to read something, like we could literally just put the alphabet, we bring you back from this dinosaur brain back up here into your frontal lobe in here, where then this is the place where you've been taught how to overcome bias, right? So we're all born with bias, but you learn and get more educated here. And so just by making you read, we bring you back into kind of almost a present moment where you can think.
Really interesting.
The second thing is we imply, so we say great communities are created with kindness. It looks like what you're about to post will likely be moderated or likely be reviewed. And humans don't like to think in some future state they're going to be thought of negatively. So people have a moment of like, I should maybe behave better. And so we give you a choice to post or to edit. And about a third of people edit. So yeah, I've still got 2/3 of people to work on, but I've got a third of people now, instead of writing back, you moron, they're saying, I really disagree with you. And the other thing in there's kind of two other things I'm really trying to stop from happening on Nextdoor. Number one is thought bubbles. Like, I don't want people to like or defriend or only connect with the people who think like them, because I think that's really dangerous, right? Northern Ireland, if you only liked or befriended the people like you, we would still be at war. But the second thing is I don't want to close down tough conversations, because if we don't have a place for tough conversations, I really don't think you will never solve everything. I went to dinner last night, came home from DC, I was pretty tired. One of my best friends was like, please come to this dinner. And it was a dinner around the table conversation about race. It was about 50-50 women of color, and women like me, women who are like, technically I'm of a color, but my color is a privilege. I was a little disappointed that there wasn't a willingness to listen somewhat to the other side. But I also understand that women of color are tired and fed up of feeling like they have to offer up the olive branch. Right. So I've been thinking a lot about that overnight, though, because if we all get tired, we also won't solve anything. So back to Nextdoor, it's important we can have those difficult conversations. So we're actually doing a bunch of work right now around contentious conversations. Like, don't take this the wrong way, but we're trying to think about, is there a way to give people timeouts? So like literally you can't post for 3 minutes. It reminds me of like when my kids were bad, they had to sit on the bottom stair of the stairs for 3 minutes, which when they were like 4, my son had like ants in his pants, so he could barely sit there for 3 minutes. And so we're thinking about things like that to kind of slightly chill conversations, but hopefully not kill them if they're important conversations to be had.
Got it. Wow, those are a lot of different things that you're working on.
Yeah, but we all have responsibility. Like, I do think, I'll say one final thing, like when I was at Square, because we dealt in money movement, when we would be creating any product right before it rolled out, or as we went going to alpha, we would have this red team exercise where we'd have a bunch of people in the room. Like, I was always in the room as the CFO, we had the head of risk, and we would literally play at being the bad guys or the bad people. Like, okay, you have this product, how are you going to steal money? And we'd just sit there and brainstorm, and I would leave, like literally my heart be going, oh my God, we're going to kill the company. But it was a really good exercise. And I think social media should be doing the same thing of, we're going to create this product and we only have best of intentions. Like, I actually don't think people are genuinely malicious, but what's the other side of this? And then let's build checks in to make sure that other side is not coming to the fore. And I don't think there's enough of that. There's too much of this mentality of fast, 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 break things, move fast, create more growth, and not enough. How do we check that we're still doing what we aspire to do as humans?
Absolutely. So how do you translate all these different things that you're working on into your day-to-day routine?
Okay, so I am definitely, I know, high energy, a little crazy for most people. So first of all, I'm a super early morning riser. So I get up around 5:30 most days, which usually when I tell people that, they're like, okay, game over. You're like stressing me out now. But, you've got to find your zone. I'm a morning person. I used to work market hours back in the day. So I used to actually have to be in the office at 4 a.m. So I think 5 is a total lie-in. I work out immediately when I get up because I recognize that I tend to hit the world hot. And if I start responding to emails of my team, I'm often not my most patient, calm self. I can be a little like, "Arr." So I work out, and that can be all sorts of things. Like I used to do crew in college, so I've got an erg that I sometimes go and play penance on. I'm very shiny right now because I just got back from a run, but it's just something that allows those all of those different chemicals in my body to start making me a better human. And then I do a little work early because I try to get in, return to like people around the world that need me before my kids wake up. And then I try to be a good mom. Like, it's a little harder with teenagers. Like, you are all not the kindest sometimes. But I really try to make sure I'm there when they come down to breakfast. If nothing else, just to like start their day. My daughter is both my kids have played piano, but we used to do a lot of piano practice in the morning as well. I actually find it very calming. So I like just sitting there, listening, watching, helping. And then work starts. And, again, as a CEO, you're kind of in some ways like I call it chief dog's body. I don't know if that's a phrase in the US, but in the UK, it means that you'll do anything. So I often joke, like, when I started Nextdoor, I think one of the first things I did is I walked into the ladies' bathroom and there were no tampons. I was like, okay, we need tampons. The office manager was like, okay, I'll put an order into Amazon. I was like, well, people who need it probably can't wait for Amazon. So I walked out of the building over to CVS and I came back with like these boxes of tampons, and I could tell everyone's like, oh my God, she's nuts. But I'm like, whatever needs to be done to make everyone else be their best self, to do the best work of their lives, that's what I view my job as. But in a more strategic way of talking about it, number one is people first. So my job is to hire the best people and help them fly. Number two is to really be clear on what the focus of the company is. So my job is to resource allocate. And then after that, I really do think it's about making sure the sense of purpose comes through, right? That I'm always living the purpose so that people are inspired by it. So, I was in DC, I was at this big fancy women's conference. It was awesome. But instead of going to the big fancy dinner on the Tuesday night, I actually went off and met with a group of men, but a dad's group that came together on Nextdoor. And we went to Panera Bread. It was not fancy. It was raining. 15 men who came together on our platform. And it was incredible because they had found each other 3 years ago, and just their vulnerability as dads was really poignant. And so it was good for me because it fills my tank, but it's good for me to talk to the company because it helps fill their tank. But like, this is why we show up in the world.
Wow, that's incredible. I wish I had the power to wake up at 5:30 in the morning.
Yeah, just wait till later in your life and you'll have kids, and then you'll be like, oh, this is easy because I got like a rooster going off.
So throughout this entire journey, what role has confidence played?
A lot. If I were to go back to my younger self, like my teenage self, I think on the one hand, I had a lot of confidence because, I had a family that I was very grounded. I feel so blessed. Like I did grow up in a war, which I guess is a fair amount of trauma in your life, but I felt very supported by parents. I had a big extended family. And so I think that gave me a lot of confidence. That said, there were moments when my confidence got very shook. So we talked about my gap year, but then I went to Oxford, and that was probably the first time where I felt really, gosh, totally out of place. Like the UK doesn't suffer from the same racism that the United States suffers from, but it suffers from classism. And I remember having this horrible experience. My first night of formal hall, right? Oxford is a lot like Harry Potter. So you show up in, it's all by fancy names that mean nothing, but subfusk. And for girls, subfusk was like a white blouse with a little black tie. You wore your gown, so your black gown. You had to wear a skirt because we weren't allowed to wear trousers or pants at that point in time. And we had to carry our mortar boards because you weren't yet allowed to wear your mortar board because you weren't graduating. So we sat down at dinner on these long trestle tables. So probably like maybe 12, like maybe 6 or even 10 on each side. And I was at one end, and there was this boy, and I'm going to give him a man title, boy at the other end. And we had all started to eat. And like suddenly I kind of realized the whole table had stopped. And then I was like, oh my God, they're all looking at me. And then I heard this boy say, who is the savage at the end of the table? And I was like, what the hell is he, like, why are they all looking at me? And you know, my crime was using my knife incorrectly. So instead of holding my knife a certain way, I was holding my knife a different way. And I just remember, like the blood going straight up, like turning bright red. And then I remember almost like the blood doing this and then turning white. I thought I was going to faint, actually. And it was a horrible feeling of like, I didn't want to cry. I was like, I cannot cry. I wanted to cry. And going home from dinner that night, I'm really feeling like I really do not belong here. And so like getting your confidence back after something like that is very hard. And you had to go deep, and you know that still stings to this day. And so I think a lot about like, where does that well come from that you fall back to? Like for me, then it was just work. I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna have such better grades than you. I'm gonna do so much better than you. Like it is fuel to the fire. But you got to dig deep. And so yes, confidence is there. But even the most confident people, when they can look on the outside like everything's great, there's a lot going on inside. And I think if you always remember that about people, number one, when they're maybe reacting to you, it's usually not about you, it's about something that's happened for them. And number two, that no matter how polished someone looks, there's that child, there's that young human being, there's that thing that happened to them. You don't get the privilege of hearing it usually, but knowing it's there, I think will help you meet them much more as a human to human.
I really love that. And I think it just beautifully ties into what you were saying about community again.
Yep.
I'd love to transition to some of these live questions that the girls are asking. Why don't we start with Natalie? So Natalie, I'll promote you to be a panelist, and then you can turn on your video and ask Miss Friar or Sarah. I need to stop doing that.
Totally fine, don't worry.
All right.
Hi, Natalie.
Do you want to turn on your video and ask?
Hi, sorry, I'm making sure I have the right camera on because I've just recently had some problems with like weird graphics on my screen.
Don't worry at all. I got like shiny face going on, but you go ahead.
Okay, here you are.
Ah, there you are.
Hi, it's so nice to meet you, first of all, and thanks so much to Object for hosting this. My question was to Sarah or Ms. Friar. Could you please explain a little bit more about what your daily responsibilities and what your daily decisions look like when you were CFO at Square and or CEO of Nextdoor?
Thank you. What a great question. And I really appreciate your courage in asking a question. It can be hard in these forums. So in terms of daily responsibilities, like I said, there's these kind of big responsibilities that I always come back to. People. Am I getting my people right? So actually, I try to actually put all people decisions and responsibilities into the first part of my day because I'm a morning person. And so my best energy happens up until about 11 a.m. So whether it's recruiting, like maybe I'm interviewing someone, Maybe it's writing reviews. We're about to go into review season at Nextdoor. Maybe it's making decisions. Right now, as I think about 2022, which I can't believe we're months out from, I really need to think about the organization, right? In most companies, what happens is the company grows faster than most humans can grow. So when you hire, if you kind of think about, sorry, I'm a mathematician, engineer at heart. If you think about a company growing like this, you actually usually want to hire people that are on top of that line, because they'll grow like this. And where the two lines cross, if you drop that down onto the x-axis, that's the time where the company has now outgrown the person. And those are hard moments, because usually you either have to layer them, often they'll leave. And so you want to give yourself as much running room as possible. So I think a lot about like the right organizational structures and so on. Next part of the day, kind of it's less about the day and more about how the week goes. So on Mondays, we do stand-ups, and it's my time to go very deep from a product perspective, like how we've set a product roadmap, how are we building against it? We might make some product decisions on those Monday meetings. And then actually Friday is our stand down, when we do our big all hands for the whole company. So it's kind of both celebratory, it's accountability moment, how are we doing against key metrics? And it's a moment for, right, particularly now in virtual land, for us all to connect. It's also actually Friday afternoons is when I do design review, which is one of my favorite meetings of the week, because it's when I get to see the product coming alive. And I get to have input on like, that language doesn't work, or that look and feel doesn't work, or that just doesn't feel very intuitive. And so we spend a lot of time, and the good thing is I am a customer of our product. So we spend a lot of time walking through the soup to nuts of like how the product looks. And then in the middle, a lot of a CEO and even a CFO's life is very kind of the moment. Like you can find yourself getting overly programmed. So I could look at my days and I literally have meetings from like 8:30 a.m. to like 6 p.m. But like, if I'm lucky, my EA's left me 20 minutes for lunch. And so sometimes I actually go through and I clear my calendar, because I need space to think, but also you have to really allow for the serendipity, right? When you're managing a company, these things pop up, like usually people things. Usually when I'm at my worst, I'm like, oh, I can't wait for the robots to take over, so I don't have to deal with people anymore. But you do have to allow for just people moments to happen. And then you overlay that with, like I'll do a big trip to DC. Like now I'm kind of back to more travel again. Like when I go on a trip to DC, it really becomes like we went to the White House to actually talk about some of these moderation things that we just spoke about. We go see customers. So I went to see a lot of different advertisers. We go to see neighbors. We talk to journalists and press and think about earned media. So those weeks become very intense. I kind of like them though, because they're not a normal week. So they kind of, my curiosity gets satisfied. So I have another, if I look out through the end of the year, I'm going to do a trip like that to New York in early November. I'm actually going to go to Singapore mid-November, right before Thanksgiving. And then I probably will do one more trip in December. I'm not sure what it will be, but one more trip just to get out and about and see the team around the world.
That sounds really cool. Thank you.
It's fun. It's a good job.
Thanks for the question, Natalie. Wow, that's a lot of responsibility that you're managing.
It's all good. I have a great team, both at home and at work. So that's, get your people right. Everything else just works.
Naomi, do you want to ask the next question? We will bring you on as a panelist. Awesome.
Hi.
Naomi. How are you?
I'm great. How about you?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, so my question is I think a lot about like balancing equality and equity, because in our society, this has become a really controversial issue, but I was wondering, as a Nextdoor employee, how do you balance these issues? And like, for example, if controversial issues are like discussed in a very peaceful manner, but like some people are still like are upset by the content, how would Nextdoor handle this?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because these are challenging times. And one thing I love about your generation, you guys have no fear. You people have no fear. I hate the term guys. You people have no fear. And And, you know, I feel like my generation's handing you not a great world. And I thank you for the fact that you all really are thinking about things much more deeply than I feel like I did at your age, like whether it's climate change, equity, diversity, right? You're all so much more sophisticated. So you give me a lot of like hope and optimism for the future. So thank you. In terms of how we deal with it internally, I mean, number one, you absolutely have to be, I think, very explicit about diversity and equity. It doesn't just happen to you. And it's a journey that will never be finished. So there is no destination like, oh, look, we got here and now we're all diverse and everything's equitable. It just never happens. Some of it for me starts with how I role model. So for example, our board is a place where I get to do like true recruiting, where it's up to me who sits on our board at Nextdoor. And so when I joined, I will admit to being very into gender equity. It'd always been my thing. Like there's a reason why I run around with t-shirts that say things like phenomenal women. I'm really all about like women. And I long for a world where, you know, I would say women have an unfair advantage, but that's more because I just want to force us to the point where it's equitable. So I think I actually did a very good job on hiring women onto our board, women at all levels of our organization. But what I totally missed, frankly, was race diversity. And so last year, after the whole lift in Black Lives Matter and all the stuff we started to do with our platform, I also realized it was on me to go think about how do we bring that conversation into the company too. So starting at a board level, I just very explicitly went out to recruit, and I ended up hiring 2 amazing board members. So Andrea Wisham is the former COO for Oprah Winfrey. So she worked for Oprah for 20 years, for 2 decades. She's a master storyteller, and she's a woman of color. And then I hired John Hope Bryant, who is a man of color, born in Compton in LA, pretty tough upbringing. He runs an organization called Operation Hope. It's a nonprofit organization. I actually sit on his board now too. But John is very outspoken. And I just see how the tenor of our board conversations have changed. Things that I think we wouldn't have noticed or talked about, like they notice and bring up. And now the whole board is talking about a much richer diet of things that we should care about at a company level. So it's just one example. The other thing I did is I created, because, you know, in the end, your board of directors probably shouldn't be more than kind of 8, 9 people, because otherwise it gets too unwieldy. But I created the concept of advisory boards. So we have 4 advisory boards now. We have a neighborhood vitality advisory board, a customer client advisory board, public agency advisory board, and then we just created an SMB, a small business advisory board. But that's a place where suddenly you get a whole new portfolio to play with, right? Because technically 10-ish people on a board, 4 of them, that's 40 people. And so what I'm really excited about when I look at those boards, don't quote me exactly on these numbers, but it's close. I think something like 70% of those boards are female or non-binary individuals, and 52% are people of color or underrepresented minorities. So I'm over-indexing there again, because I'm trying to tilt the ship and make sure the whole ship of Nextdoor is thinking in a much more broad, diverse way. The other one thing for me and my executive team, beyond, again, what often Americans think of as diversity, 70% of my executive team was born outside the United States. And so I actually feel like diversity of culture is incredibly important too. You know, my head of marketing, Miriam, was born in Iran. My head of revenue, which is a very big position at most companies, was born in Denmark. My head of product was born in India. So just those, and I could keep going, but those are just some examples of just getting much more diversity of opinion into the mix.
Yeah, so actually, can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, please.
So tying into like the filtering that you were talking about before, I was wondering, for example, if someone had wanted to bring up a sort of issue and Nextdoor was trying to say, oh, that might be controversial, like that might be sparking some kind of like conflicts. I was just wondering, how do you balance that sort of, okay, we're not trying to obstruct voices, but at the same time, we want to create an atmosphere where everyone feels comfortable.
Yeah, so inside the company, when those conversations come up, we have ground rules, and we often will set those up ahead of time. So for example, next week, I think it's on the calendar, we're going to have a conversation about reproductive rights, particularly because of what happened in Texas vis-a-vis all the abortion laws. And so there we're very, very clear that we are creating, this is going to be a safe and confidential space, where we can talk about reproductive rights, that we really welcome, like we explicitly say, we welcome diverse and intersectional voices and experiences, and that allies are welcome. So this is not a conversation where women are only going to talk to women. It's a broad-based conversation. We'll set expectations. So things like we want to maintain confidentiality. You have to actively listen. You have to suspend judgment and assumptions, believe that everyone has best intentions, and that no one's obligated to speak, or there's no getting called upon. So that takes down the fear. So we're very clear on expectations. And then we also are very clear on having a run of show to manage the conversation. So we say, you know, for example, we will start with some opening remarks. There's usually someone that owns the beginning of a conversation to share the ground rules. We're very clear on the topic. And then we open the floor and allow people to share experiences, opinions, feelings. We want them to have a space to be vulnerable. We welcome opposing thoughts and diverse perspectives. And so it's a very managed conversation, but it's purposeful in how we're managing it. When it's conversations that are happening on our platform, that is also a place where there are guidelines and ground rules. So when you join Nextdoor, we have a set of guidelines. They're kind of very macro, and frankly, I think they're kind of obvious, like be helpful, not hurtful. Don't discriminate, right? You would think, why do I have to tell grown-ups that this is how to behave? But we also then sometimes get a little bit more fine-grained, right? Nextdoor is not a place for conversations about national politics. There are other places to do that, but you can discuss local politics. There's frankly rules that are not so much about societal issues, but things like you can overpost. So don't soapbox, don't overpost. And commercial intent is something we actually manage because we don't want it to become like a bad Craigslist, right? We really do want to make sure there's space for community. By having guidelines, it means that when conversations start on the platform, everyone is now the eyes and ears of, is this appropriate, right? Is this what we want in our neighborhood? And so that allows you to report content or report individuals. So we didn't buy in from the get-go to this kind of, you know, massive freedom of speech, kind of, which I think is a little bit a cop-out again, by the way. Like we actually said, no, we're a guideline-driven platform. And when you join, after you've made it over that whole hurdle of verifying, we actually then ask you to sign a neighborhood pledge. So again, back to putting friction in the experience, but it's about setting the context. I think you have to be very, very, very intentional.
Awesome. Thank you,
Naomi.
That's very interesting. Sorry. I really like the approach you took in managing those guidelines.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the questions. They're great.
Awesome. Thank you. I know we're running over time, but Ms. Friar, if you have another minute, I'd love to ask one more question.
Sure.
I loved that you admitted that you realized you hadn't actually done enough work around racial diversity. And as a leader, or just even as a person, I feel like having that vulnerability and admitting that you made a mistake can be really tough. So how does that sort of perspective shape your day-to-day work, and how do you sort of hold yourself accountable?
Number one is by making it okay to say that I'm a human being. I make mistakes all the time, because if I can't admit that I make mistakes, I think it's actually even harder in my organization. And that is a super dangerous place to work, when people can't admit mistakes, because then they start to do crazy things like hide mistakes or blame other people. And that is a horrible culture to live in, and it's a dangerous culture. So that's number one, is being very clear. It's painful at times, like particularly in my world where there's nothing like the press, who like to find your little quote and they don't give you all the context. They just take the quote and it's, you know, Nextdoor CEO says that she da 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 da. And you know, you have to live with then the consequences of some people. It's confirmation bias. They're like, you see, I knew that she was a bad person, or I knew that platform wasn't for me. And you really wish they would take a moment to hear the whole context. But I don't know, life is too short. So I kind of feel like you have to lean in there and be a leader on that front. I think it's one of the most important things you can do. And I think also showing vulnerability, I think it's back to confidence and strength. I think one of the things that women really have going for us is that leaders, I think we are richer in our response to the world. When I first joined the workforce, and particularly when I worked for Goldman Sachs, there was always this unwritten rule: never cry. Do not cry in the workforce. And I definitely had a few moments in the bathroom where the tears were flowing, and other women might find me and they would say, leave, go home, leave the building, go get a coffee. Like, in other words, don't ever show that outside. I think once I got to actually Square, I think I cried in front of Jack Dorsey more times than you can imagine, because it's a stress response for me. So when I'm, and for a lot of women, so when I'm under stress, particularly when it's very personal, the tears do flow. And like the first time, I could tell Jack was a little bit like, oh my God, what's happening? This woman is crying. She's my CFO. She's normally bulletproof. But it was a really good way for him to understand how important it was for me. And what I really appreciated is how, he didn't like run out of the room. He actually stayed and we talked it through. And he gave me a lot of confidence, and he also can show a lot of vulnerability. And I think it's what makes Jack such an amazing leader. So, I guess like advice for all of you is, don't try to be someone you're not. Everyone else is taken. Like, really lean into those moments of vulnerability. I think they're very empowering over time in your career. And I think bringing your whole self fulsomely to what you're doing. I mean, no one can stop you when you have the full power of you going at some point.
Absolutely. Wow, that was a really interesting story.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time to kick off our fall season. This was super incredible. I love just learning more about how you step up every day as a leader and how you're trying to manage some of these conversations that we're having at a national and international level. So it was absolutely incredible.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for doing this. I think you're amazing that you've created this series. I think you're all amazing for joining out of your Saturday mornings. And like I said, your generation really inspires me. So please keep doing what you're doing, because you guys you're our future. We're all depending on you to save us from ourselves somewhat.
Lovely. Well, sorry I couldn't get to everyone's questions in the Q&A, but thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and have a great weekend.